साहब, भारतीय भाषा संस्थान मैसूर, शिक्षा मंत्रालय, गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया के तहत भारतीय भाषा संस्थान मैसूर में तैनात हैं। ये कई सारी इंपॉर्टेंट पोजीशंस होल्ड कर रहे हैं, मैं जिनके कुछ मैं बताऊंगा। ये भारतीय भाषा संस्थान में एकेडमिक सेक्रेटरी हैं और इसके अलावा ये बहुत मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ एजुकेशन का बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट प्रोजेक्ट है जिसको बोलते हैं नेशनल ट्रांसलेशन मिशन, राष्ट्रीय अनुवाद मिशन हिंदी में बोलते हैं, उसको भी ये हेड है। इसके अलावा इन्होंने अपनी जो पीएचडी है, एमफिल है, एमए है, ये यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ हैदराबाद से पूरी की है और वहाँ पर ये वहाँ के बहुत एक रेप्यूटेड सेंटर है, सेंटर फॉर अप्लाइड लिंग्विस्टिक्स एंड कंप्यूटेशनल ट्रांसलेशन इन अप्लाइड लिंग्विस्टिक्स और लैंग्वेज टीचिंग इनका एक बहुत मतलब कि कोर एरियाज रहा है, ना केवल एकेडमिक्स में बट ऑल्सो इन रिसर्च। एंड डॉक्टर खान ने कई सारी किताबें किताबें का मतलब लगभग 1 दर्जन से अधिक किताबों के ये एडिटर रहे हैं और कई दर्जन इन्होंने नेशनल, राष्ट्रीय तथा अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर पेपर पब्लिश किए हैं, देश विदेश में कई कॉन्फ्रेंसेस में भाग लिया है तथा एक बहुत अच्छे क्लासरूम टीचर्स हैं। ही इज अ वंडरफुल क्लासरूम टीचर। सो डॉक्टर तारिक खान, I extend a very warm welcome to you and thank you so much for giving your precious time to us, and we are very, very eager to hear you. Dr. Khan, over to you, sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Pankaj, and आप सभी को मेरा नमस्कार. It's a pleasure to be part of this program and discuss some ideas related to language teaching methods with very experienced teachers of NVS. I hope the interactions that we have today will help you in devising your future classrooms and understanding some of the problems that you might have encountered so far. I should like to mention right at the start that the previous session has partly done my task or made my task easier because a lot of discussions that took place in the previous session were related to what I am going to discuss right now, and they actually put this discussion in a better perspective. So that way, I should like to thank Dr. Anandita Sahu for having made my task slightly easier. And for the same, I would like to share some slides with which it would be easier for us to follow. Let me share it with you. I hope the sharing has begun.
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. See. And while the technical aspect of this sharing is happening, it is taking time. I hope it comes properly in front of you.
We can see the presentation, sir. We can see the presentation, sir.
We can see, sir.
All right. So let me draw your attention to some of the facts that are very important for us to understand, because all of us are in a way or the other dealing with a common commodity, a common substance called language. So when we all are concerned with language, we need to understand how language behaves, what are its what are the major factors that affect a language, and in particular language teaching and learning in a classroom. So we need to look at various aspects of language, and for that I would take a couple of slides to discuss that with you, and then come to actual teaching methods that we are aware of. Before coming to the methods, let me discuss some of the common ideas that have emerged through language enthusiasts, linguists, and various scholars working in various cooperating disciplines. So one of the important things about language is its definition itself. How would you define language? And when you look at the definition, probably the first definition that comes to your mind, and the first definition that you might have seen in your classrooms, would be language as a medium of communication. And I very well agree with you. On the fact that language is a medium of communication. Of course, it is primarily used for communication, and it is communication in which we see our language all the time. But at the same time, let me also draw your attention to the fact that language has a slightly bigger role to play for human beings. So language is a medium of communication. That is one fact, true about it, but at the same time, it is also a medium of cognition, and that we can understand in many ways, one of which is like most of the learning that takes place happens through language. So a lot of knowledge that we have gained has happened because of language that we have. For that reason, it is important for us to separate human language from animal communication. And for that reason, you'll notice that many people would like to say animals have communication but not language. It is only humans that have language. It is something very interesting, because many people would argue that animals are also able to communicate, they talk to each other, and message is shared between and among them. That is why they should be having language. But a scholar like Charles F. Hockett brought to our notice some very important observations, and in his observations he compared the features that animals and humans share and the features that animals and humans do not share. Out of this comparison, we get to know that human language is used for communication, but it has slightly different characteristic from animal communication. And for animals, it is just the conveying of message, and that is why it is called only communication. In case of humans, there are several factors, and we'll be looking at them slowly in subsequent slides. We also should have a look at how language evolved in human beings. When I say language evolved in human beings, it looks like I have already chosen the idea that language was not always present there. You may disagree with me. You may like to have the view that language was always present there. Human beings have always made use of language. Okay, but at the same time, those who believe in the fact that language has evolved like human beings have evolved, then you'll know that it has slowly developed, and the process of evolution of language in humans is not complete even now. We will examine this fact as well, and perhaps that is why we need to discuss so many language teaching learning methods. We also should look at like how language develops in human children. When we say that it's a natural thing, why is it not that a human child is born with proper language? Why is it that the child has to spend a couple of years or 3 to 4 years to speak the first his or her first language? And then, as the previous speaker has made a distinction between acquisition and learning, we also need to take that into consideration. Here, I would like to put the same concept in slightly different words. Acquisition is, or say acquisition and learning, in both cases, language develops in the human being, but in case of acquisition, there is no formal training. It is a natural process. It is involuntary. It happens on its own. So all of us acquired our first language naturally without formal, very clear design instruction. Whereas in case of learning, it is formally taught. It refers to things formally taught. And in most cases, the second, third, or fourth languages are learned. Your cases would be very different. As language teachers, you would come across students who have acquired the language that you are teaching. And you might be teaching a language that a student is learning as a second language. So you have a different kind of a challenge. And it is for this kind of a challenge we needed to understand that acquisition and learning are slightly different. They are not one and the same. Though the words are used interchangeably, they refer to two different processes. And in your case, your methods, your techniques would depend a lot on whether your students are acquiring that language or they have acquired that language, or they are learning it as a second or third language. At the same time, we also need to take the stages of language acquisition and language learning into consideration. You'll all perhaps agree with me that whether it's a child in Odisha, or it's a child in Tamil Nadu, or it's a child in America or Japan or China or anywhere, the stages are usually same. That means a child would be born with no language, visible language as such, and then slowly the child reaches the stage of cooing, and then there is babbling, and then there is one word stage, and then the child starts putting together words, and then starts forming phrases and sentences, and that's how language grows in the child. So in case of language learning also, if you're learning a new language, you'll encounter sounds and words in the first place, and then you would be able to combine those sounds and words into larger units. So that way, stages of language acquisition and learning show some kind of a pattern across the globe. Then we come at skills. Yes, language, when you are teaching or learning a language, you have various skills which will fall into two broad categories. You have production skills and comprehension skills, and in the production skills, you have writing and speaking. In the comprehension skills, you have listening and reading. What happens in case of simple development of a child is when you expose the child to several inputs, several kind of stimuli, the child abstracts rules and then does errors, makes errors, and then grows with that. All of us have done the same thing. When we were growing, we were learning our own language, we all have committed errors. We all have overgeneralized the rules that we abstracted from our surrounding. And that's how, when adults corrected, we started using the language correctly. So for that reason, it is very important for language teachers to analyze errors that students commit and find out patterns in those errors. Finding out errors and patterns of errors would be very helpful for future classes, would be very helpful for future learners, because with that, the teacher can predict some of the errors that the future learners are likely to commit, and at the same time they would be having ready solutions to those errors, ready solutions to those problems. Then we also need to look into socio-cultural aspects of language, like the previous speaker has talked about motivation and orientation. These are very important factors. We shall be examining all of it in the discussion that follows. Let me bring to you some basic concepts and distinctions that are important for us to understand and put this discussion in the right perspective. I hope the slides are moving. So
Slides are moving, sir.
Okay, so let me bring to your attention the very important distinction of communication and cognition. And for that, I have already placed before you a small introduction, that is like language is a medium of communication. All of us have heard and learned and repeatedly used this definition of language, but it's also a medium of cognition. What do I mean by it? What do we basically understand from this statement? Language is a medium of cognition. When we say language is a medium of cognition, what we mean is it helps us understand the world. It helps us understand and gain knowledge. So this can be interpreted in many ways. First of which is various subjects that you are teaching or you're likely to teach to your students depend a lot on the language that the child has. That means language becomes some kind of an enabler for the development of various other skills in the children. So it is not just for the communicative purposes, it is also for the purpose of understanding various other concepts, be it mathematics, science, or social sciences. That's one thing. The second thing is your own world, your own thought process, your own experience of the atmosphere and surrounding is also expressed through language. And in order to express them, you constitute sentences that were not spoken before, that you had not used before, that are very unique and new. They may not be in pieces of creative literature, but it is very sure that these sentences are new. So when you also come across various problems in your own life and you are narrating it to your friends, you will experience that you have not used those sentences, and at times you will feel at loss of words. You will not have words to express your own ideas, and these are like instances that we all encounter, so nothing very new to us. But then if we are able to overcome that, we have also learned say new thing by doing that. Let me also draw your attention to the subtle difference between acquisition and learning. We all have understood that when formal training or formal instruction is not there, we call it acquisition. And when there is formal training, formal instruction, explicit rules are taught, then we say this is learning. Your cases are very different. I'm very sure you will be coming across students who are native speakers of the language, and they also have to be taught that language, or that the literature of that language, or higher skills in that language. So your cases are very unique, where you have to blend the ideas from acquisition and learning to make your students perform very well in the language that he or she is speaking at home. At the same time, you'll also encounter students who are who are not native speakers, who are speaking that language or learning that language as a second language or third language. In this context, the kind of teaching and evaluation that you do is very important. And that is why we need to discuss the methods. Why it is important is because as we have several ideas about language, so many definitions for language, we have also developed a lot of methods for language teaching. So your method, somebody else's method, my method may or may not match. There can be several methods that, or there are in fact several methods that are available, and we need to choose the method, or say blend the best of all the methods for a good outcome of our own classroom. At the same time, let us also try to understand what happens in case of evaluation. What happens in a language classroom evaluation? What do we test when we are testing a student for his or her language skills? You'll probably agree with me that when we are teaching and evaluating our students, we are basically looking at how much the child can reproduce, how much the child has, how much the student has memorized. So our teaching and evaluation are to some extent biased towards rote learning. They are biased towards memorization. They are biased towards rule reproduction. So we are not actually looking at the creative and aesthetic aspects of language when we are teaching and evaluating students. That is one area we need to introspect for ourselves, and then provide to our students that which would be best suitable for them, and that which would help them understand other subjects very well. So that means we are slowly moving into language teaching methods. Let me again repeat the sentence that there are several methods available, and a lot of these methods are based on certain approaches. So we need to understand the concept of approach. That means there is a philosophy that determines the kind of method and techniques that you are going to adopt. Let me also draw your attention to the fact that in language classroom, a lot of focus is given on input. A lot of focus is given on input. That is to say that a lot of teachers believe that by making the syllabus very, very rich they'll be able to give more input to the students, and that is how they would be able to ensure the best outcomes, which may not be true, and which may cause some kind of load on the students, and the students may not be able to perform very well. So in recent years, the idea has started changing, and the focus has started shifting from input to intake. That says, do not only focus on how much you can speak and how much you can write and how much you can provide to the students, how big your syllabus is. Rather, you focus on how much the children, how much the students can intake, how much they can retain, how much they can hold. So that way it is a kind of a very clear-cut shift from teacher-oriented approach to learner-oriented approach. So that would ensure that the classrooms do not only give output. Output can be anything. You teach 5 stories to children and ask them questions based on that. They may be able to answer, but then that does not guarantee that these students have mastered the skills that you wanted. So for that reason, it is important to draw our own attention to intake and thereby ensure outcome among the students. So this way we'll be shifting from teacher-oriented or teacher-centric classroom to learner-oriented and learner-centric classroom. We will be moving to the language teaching methods slowly, and let us quickly have a look at what do we teach when we are teaching language. What is it that is important there? There are levels. When we are teaching language, we are concerned with levels like pronunciation. So we are concerned with phonetics and phonology. We are concerned with proper pronunciation of sounds and sound patterns. We are concerned with how sounds combine and make patterns in different kinds of words. We are also concerned with word formation. We are concerned with how parts of the words combine with words and make them meaningful in a sentence. We are concerned with meaning of the words. We are also concerned with how sentences are formed. We are concerned with how words and their groups constitute sentences. And we are also very concerned about the contextual use of language. That means making use of language appropriately. When you are teaching a child, you are not just interested in making the child use a sentence like a template. You basically want the student to make use of language in all kinds of situations. And that is when you would feel happy, when your students are able to use language appropriately in all the contexts. They are not just able to remember words. They are not just able to pronounce correctly. They are not just able to recite. They are able to use language as the situation demands them. So that is why it is important to take these levels into consideration. As far as the skills are concerned, you are very well aware that there are 4 major skills that you are expected to impart, and among them, listening and speaking are the ones which precede reading and writing. Listening and reading are comprehension skills, while speaking and writing are production skills. Then we also look at 2 very important aspects of language, which are discussed by Noam Chomsky, a very important scholar in linguistics. According to Noam Chomsky, we as human beings who use language have something called competence, by which we are able to judge whether a statement, whether a sentence is possible or not possible in our language. That's one thing. Secondly, we are, as native speakers of a language, having an ability, a competence by which we will be able to produce various instances of language. So when when we perform language, when we are using language, we are basically producing sentences and words based on these are like when we are performing language, we are making use of our ability, we are making use of our competence in the language. So your role as a teacher becomes very interesting here. You are expected to increase the competence of the children, the competence of the students that you get, and also show that competence in actual performance. It is possible that somebody is able to understand but not able to express that. It is possible on various occasions that a learner is able to understand but not able to express that. So your role at that time becomes doubly important when you want that competence of the learner to come into performance. You have already discussed, or you have already understood the context of first language, second language, and foreign language in the previous lecture. I would not like to repeat that again, except saying that the requirements, the challenges involved, and the strategies that you may adopt for first language and second language and foreign language would differ. It may not be the same. So the factors that might affect our decision about methods are many, some of which require our discussion. One of the factors that we need to take into consideration is something that was forwarded by a very eminent psychologist called B.F. Skinner, who said that we are able to learn a language, we are able to speak a language because we imitate. So we try to speak like our parents used to speak, and then we are able to speak the language. He also said that we are able to speak, read and write because there is reinforcement by the elder members of the community. So according to B.F. Skinner, imitation, reinforcement and rewards help a learner or a child to develop language. Noam Chomsky argued against him, and he said that no, this cannot be true, or this cannot be the sole factors. He says that if we were imitating, then we would be all of us would be speaking like children. You just try to recall how you speak to a 1-year-old child or a 2-year-old child. You purposefully distort your sentences. You make your sentences ungrammatical also. You distort your pronunciation and speak to the child. And when you do that, you want to be very simple to the child, and the child still is able to come up with a good language. So what is interesting and argued by Chomsky is, even though the input was distorted, it was inadequate, the child is coming up with fantastic language. How can that be possible? If it were based on reward and reinforcement, then the children would be learning only as much as you provide to them. But you might have come across this very interesting observation, that is your children or children around you are also speaking sentences that you never taught them. They are speaking sentences that you taught them. They are also speaking sentences that you never taught them. So how is that happening? And then one more argument that Chomsky forwarded was that when children are growing, you provide them inputs, you provide them some data, but that is very inadequate, that is small in size. How is it that they are able to speak so much by the age of say 4 or 5 or 6 only? That means they must be having some other ability inside them with which they are able to make use of the inputs from the surrounding, and they are able to come up with language. And then he says that it may be some kind of innate quality. He says that it may be because language was already present there and it got triggered. So future scholars did not agree fully with Chomsky. Some of them said that the input that you give to children are not as inadequate, they are not as distorted as Chomsky thought. In fact, sometimes the corrections that you do with children are also important, and it's as the children are slowly gaining the skills, you go on to modify your own interactions with them also. But then some of the arguments that he has raised cannot be ignored also. So we may choose our own sides for this debate, but the facts that Chomsky has brought before us are important, and maybe our own ideas about language teaching and learning would have the best of all these things, would have ideas from all these arguments, even though they are diagonally opposite. We also need to look at the approaches. The earlier speaker has already discussed the deductive and inductive approaches. Let me just repeat it for you, that when you are giving explicit instructions, when you are providing advanced rules to the students and asking them to use those rules in day-to-day situation, you are basically following some kind of deductive approach, which was very, very like common earlier. If you look at how language was taught to you in your own childhood, you would see that most of the teachers who taught you followed some kind of deductive approach, where rules, very strict rules were given, and you were expected to follow those rules, and any deviation from the rule would return with punishment. So reward and punishment became very important at that time. Very, very important ideas earlier. But then slowly the ideas in language classrooms grew, and the new scholars felt that it is not appropriate. In fact, the learners should be allowed to develop rules on their own, and they should be just shown patterns. They should be exposed to various patterns, and these patterns would help them develop their own rules. How effective this can be is debated. There are still some scholars who disagree with this method, and there are some who say this is very helpful. We can choose for ourselves, but at the same time, we need to look at the merits of both the approaches and then devise what would be best suitable for our own classrooms. Method refers to like practice, how we are using a particular theory into practice, and then we can devise any technique, or say a number of techniques to apply that method or apply a particular approach. But at the same time, we also need to look into several factors. The socio-cultural factors are very important. There can be instances when a child is speaking perfectly grammatical sentences, but culturally unfit. So if that emerges as a situation, then it would be very undesirable. So what is important for us to understand is, when we are teaching language to our students, we should not just be focusing on grammaticality of the expressions. We should also be focusing on the suitability of the expressions that we are teaching, be it sentences or words. And that is why some sentences which are looking perfectly fit grammatically would not be culturally or contextually fit. For instance, if you visit a house where some kind of death has happened, you cannot go and use a perfectly grammatical sentence that the person has died. In fact, you will be more euphemistic there, and you say the person has passed away. Why do you do that? You do that because you want to be more polite, and you want to be culturally fit. You want to behave as expected there. For this reason, we need to understand the culture in which we are operating, the culture that our students are representing, both. And when we are doing that, what we are doing basically is a kind of a contrastive analysis. This is something very interesting. We have discussed errors. We have discussed that understanding errors can be helpful, and analyzing errors can help us predict future problems that we may encounter in our language classrooms. But at the same time, we also need to take into consideration some kind of contrastive analysis. This can be understood in two ways. One is, when we are teaching, the first language itself. So imagine a situation in which you all are Odia speakers and you are teaching Odia to Odia speakers. In this case, the contrast can be at the level of varieties. Somebody speaks one variety, somebody speaks another variety, somebody belongs to this region, somebody belongs to some other region, and your role is to find how these different regions, how these like belonging to different regions, how their affiliation to various areas would interfere in their learning the skills in the best form. On the other level, when you have students learning your language as a second language, then you need to compare the structures of the two languages involved. So you need to compare the structure of say Odia, and then if the student is a speaker of Bangla or Santhali or say Maithili or Chhattisgarhi or Hindi or English, then you would know the structure of that language. By comparing the structure, you will know what difficulties the students are likely to face. When you compare the two languages, the structure of the two languages, you would know what is missing in a particular language, and that would cause bigger challenge for the learners. For instance, the availability and unavailability of some sounds between the languages concerned. For instance, the way words are combined to form sentences, gender, number, persons, a lot of these things can vary across languages. And if you are aware of these factors well in advance, you may be able to predict the questions. And if you are able to predict the questions, if you are able to predict the problems and errors, you will be able to handle them better in the classrooms. So these are like some general guiding factors based on which all our methods would be implemented. Let me bring to you a list of methods which we can discuss. And before that, let me again remind to you all that language is defined in several ways. If you talk to different scholars, they would have different ideas about language. And when you are also asked to define language in your own ways, you will have several definitions. Now, if there are so many definitions, there are so many methods also for teaching language. And from time to time, when the ideas of classroom grew, there have been changes in the language classrooms and in the methods of language classrooms. When the technology also changes, then it impacts the language classroom. When we have a very radical view coming in a particular discipline, and if that influences various other subjects, our language classrooms also get affected. So based on that, a lot of methods have developed. It may not be possible for us to discuss all the methods today in this particular interaction, but we can take some popular methods, some of the methods that you might be following unknowingly, some of the methods that you might have read about in your own trainings and you might be adopting, some of the methods that you might have devised in your own ways, and it is coincidence that these are listed as methods. We may not be able to discuss all the methods exhaustively, but we can just have a kind of a glance at some of these methods one by one, and especially those which are very, very popular. Let us first have a look at one of the methods listed here. But before that, let me also tell you that some scholars have clubbed these methods in 3 major groups. So when we are going to discuss these methods one by one, it may also be possible for you to classify these methods in 2 or 3 different groups and say that, look, these are different methods, but they all belong to one particular group called direct methods. Or you may say that, look, these are 4 or 5 different methods, but they all emphasize on grammar and translation, so they belong to one particular group. So we can very safely say that though we have a huge number of, a large number of methods, they belong to 3 major approaches, one of which is direct approach, the other is grammar translation based approach, and the third one is communication or communicative approach. Let us go into individual methods now. The first method that might have come to your mind or that you might have encountered before is grammar translation method. And this method is very, very commonly known. It is a kind of a very typical method that we all have encountered in our own childhood, and we are likely to encounter in future also when we are learning parent languages, where the perfection in pronunciation, perfection in grammar is expected right from the start. So grammar translation method developed as a very important method. It became very, very popular, and across the globe it was it spread across the globe. And here the focus was on teaching grammar rules. The focus was on enhancing vocabulary, and the learners were given translation exercises and they were asked to perform them. So in this method, the focus was on accuracy. The focus was on correctness of speech rather than proficiency. So this method, though it was very, very popular, it had its own problems, and the criticism that it faced was proficiency itself. So when a learner was exposed to grammar translation method, the learner faced the problem of proficiency. Before speaking anything, the learner would be thinking whether what I'm going to speak is correct or not. So all the time, this consciousness about correctness interfered with the proficiency itself, and that was causing a problem, number one. Number two, it was also causing some kind of load. It was causing difficulties. It was causing stress among the learners, and it was felt that this method would not be very helpful. In a language classroom, the child is experiencing the problems that he or she would be facing in the mathematics classroom. So language classrooms started behaving like mathematics and physics classrooms. Language learning activity wasn't proving to be very interesting. So then we come to another method called audio lingual method or oral method, where it was believed that for teaching a second language or a foreign language, it would be very important to make the learners pronounce correctly and articulate like the native speakers. So the teachers started making use of dialogues and drills, and then they would all the time instruct the learners not to use their mother tongues. I'm very sure all of us might have come across this kind of a situation also. For all of us, English is not the first language, and when we were learning English, our teachers in classroom and our schools used to be very strict when we would be using say our mother tongues or first language when we were interacting with our friends. So there was like a clear-cut discouragement for the use of mother tongues in the classroom, and even though the learners would be committing errors, they were encouraged to speak in English, or they were encouraged to speak in the target language. This method makes use of contrastive analysis, as we have discussed before. The teacher would compare the two languages concerned and then make guesses about the kind of errors that the learners would commit, and then like provide advanced or they keep advanced solutions to those problems. So it was a very prominent method in the post World War II scenario, and then slowly it was felt that this method was also very strict in nature. This also had some kind of negative impact on the learner's psychology. What is the gain we have if our learners are they are scared, they are not independent, and they feel very stressed? So it was very clear to the learners through their interactions with educationists and psychologists that these methods, say grammar translation method and audio lingual methods, the learners were coming in under a lot of stress, and their learnability was to some extent affected negatively. And if the stress part could be done away with, then it would be really good. Let me draw your attention to direct method, which became very popular, and it was though it started very early in the late 19th century itself. It was like an oral method where the focus was on teaching foreign language and second language, and then here again the emphasis was on using the target language in the classroom, and here again the focus was on not on memorization, rather than that it was on like making use of the language and speaking like the native speakers, and getting into situations, making use of the target language in like we use language in our day-to-day. So this was like helpful to a great extent, and even now it is a very interesting method which is like prevalent in schools and language classrooms in many places. I am happy to introduce before you another method called total physical response, and this method is also very interesting because here there is a kind of belief that if we give verbal instructions to the learners and ask them to perform physical actions, like you say sit down, stand up, and move, so the learners are basically performing actions based on oral instructions, and indirectly they are learning the language. So this method called total physical response, which was developed by James Asher, it was very successful because the teacher in the classroom which followed this method would be planning the lessons in such a way that there is some kind of a mimicry. That means the teacher would be making a list of such instructions, making a list of such oral instructions, which would be similar to what native speakers use in their day-to-day. And then they would be first introducing the children to such instructions by themselves performing the action, and then asking the children or the learners to perform that action only. Now, what was the guiding principle for this method? This method was based on observations on how children learn, how children develop language in themselves. So it was based on the fact that infants observe their surrounding, and when they observe their surrounding, very often they speak like the parents do, or like the caregivers do, or like the adult members of the community or elder members of the community speak to the child. So they basically imitate, they mimic the way people around them speak, and that's how they are able to gain that language. That's how language develops in them. So drawing from this observation, James Asher proposed total physical response method. Now, another method which Georgy Lozanov gave is called Suggestopedia, and it's a method based on psychology and mostly used for foreign language classrooms. Here, in a language classroom, what would happen is the teacher would first explain things, then perform, and then elaborate things. So this method also had a problem. It was a teacher-centric method where teacher would be speaking things, explaining things, and then asking students to explain things. The only good thing about it was that the teachers would not say this is wrong, this is bad. They would avoid such negative comments, negative instructions. Rather than that, they would encourage or suggest as and when required. So the learners would be prompted in this kind of method, and the prompt would be a very small support, but that would be helpful for the learners to grow. Now comes the most important and most prevalent method, that is called communicative language teaching, and this is the most widely accepted method across the globe. Communicative language teaching has its focus on developing communication skills. So it is not It is not very concerned about whether the learners are able to remember 5 sentences or 5 words or 5 names of 5 flowers or 5 fruits or 5 animals. Rather than that, they are more concerned about whether the learner is able to use language in the situation or not. So this method became very popular because it had focus not only on the structural aspects of the language, it also had focus on the social and cultural aspects of the language. So this method in a way caused some kind of revolutionizing impact on language classrooms. It in a way called for re-examining the syllabus, re-examining the teaching goals, re-examining what materials the teachers are using, and re-examining the activities that are happening in the classroom. So it in a way caused some kind of an overhauling of the language classrooms itself. So very like important method. Now this was not an individual method as such, rather it was a kind of, it is a kind of a set of methods, and a lot of methods emerged from it. Now comes another method called reading method. This is something very interesting because here the focus was on a particular skill called reading skill. And let me draw a distinction between read and recite. When you are reading something just by spelling it and not understanding it, it would be called recitation. But when you are reading something with understanding, it would be called reading. So the scholars make a distinction between reading and recitation. Recitation is usually without understanding, without comprehension, whereas reading has comprehension. So reading method here focuses on like taking small texts, reading them and understanding them, and then like indirectly learning the language. So the teacher believes that when you expose smaller texts, sentences and smaller paragraphs or short stories or extracts from some text, the learner would be able to understand them, and also the set of words that are used there. So the selection of these texts would be very careful. It would be some kind of a graded selection where the simplest text would be introduced first, very small sentences maybe, or say a combination of very short sentences, and then slowly the difficulty level will go on to rise. Also, in this kind of classroom, a small set of vocabulary is introduced first. So some kind of like 5 to 10 words would be explained, and these words are likely to occur in the paragraph that would be read. So the learner is very well aware of some words and meanings that he or she is likely to encounter in the passage that he or she is going to read. So that way it was helpful, because something which is familiar comes in a use, and indirectly the learner is learning how to use a particular word or sentence or an expression. Another very interesting method before you is mimicry memorization method, where drill was of very high prominence, and there would be demonstration and then repetition. So the teacher would speak something and ask the learners to repeat that, and repeat it as the teacher repeats. In this kind of a classroom, very often the teacher would be the native speaker of the language, or if the teacher is not the native speaker of the language, he or she would call the native speaker of the language to speak to the learners. So very often the instructor would be the native speaker who would be using language as he or she uses naturally in his or her environment, and the learners who are most often foreign learners or second language learners would be repeating and mimicking the instructor, and then thereby learning it. So this was like based on demonstration, and a lot of recorded speeches were also taken. You might have come across things like audio cassettes were very popular earlier, and with that like the learners would be repeating and then speaking, pronouncing just like the native speakers. But then again, this had taxing effect. This was proving to be difficult for the learners. Then comes Stephen Krashen's natural approach, and this is called approach because it is not just a single method, rather several methods emerged out of it. And like the earlier speaker also discussed with you Stephen Krashen's theory. So this natural approach is focused on language output. It is not focused on input. We have discussed earlier that inputs where inputs were part of our or the inputs were focused in our earlier language classrooms, and it was felt that inputs are not just enough, rather intake is important. Similarly, output gained prominence here, and then slowly it was realized that just output is not what we are looking for, rather outcome is more important. So Krashen's natural approach focused on language output, and it was based on natural principles of language development. It says that it should not be very difficult or stressful for the learners, rather it should be easy and natural for them, and they should be able to experiment, and they should be able to try various things, apply their own language experiences, and thereby learn it. So it was not focusing on the structure of the language. This approach does not focus on vocabulary. It focuses on the ability to gain communication skills. It is a learner-centric approach, and it focuses on developing communication skills rather than grammar and vocabulary. Then comes cognitive code approach, and it is based on the findings of or say developments that were taking place in 1960s in Europe and America. So it is based on the fact that when you are learning language, you are also developing, or you're not just gaining some sentences and words, you're also learning how to learn, and you're also learning various habits. You're also learning how to understand other subjects. So in that case, it is something related to cognition, and it should be dealt with more seriousness. So it actually calls for more seriousness among the teachers, and it says that the learners should be active participants of the classroom. They should not be mute spectators. Then comes like task-based language learning, and it's also called like task-based language teaching. And then it's a method that involves the participants to be put into real-life situations. Like when you are teaching the students, you ask them to behave like a doctor, like an engineer, like a teacher or a student, and you just put them in real-life situations, and you ask them to perform language. You ask them to use language as if they were behaving in the actual classrooms, actual surrounding. So it is not focused only on explicit grammar and vocabulary teaching. Rather, it focuses on actual usages, the way in which language would be required, the way in which the language is used on day-to-day basis. And that is why role plays became very important tools for language teachers in task-based language learning classroom. So here, like the learners would be asked to enact some roles, and while they are basically doing dramatic activities, they are using language, falling into problems, and then overcoming those problems, and unknowingly, indirectly learning the language. So this method also gained a lot of prominence. Then comes another method, eclectic method, which I would like to emphasize on, because it's a method that makes use of all the good things everywhere. And it's a method I hope you would be unknowingly following also. It's a method that makes use of best practices available wherever. So as such, it will be very difficult to say like what are the important things of this method. Rather, it is kind of a practical method which says that yes, all other methods also have positive and negative aspects. Let's make use of the positive aspects of other methods, and then help our learners gain skills and proficiency in language. So this also involves like oral practices, reading and question answer, role play, and getting into situations, and then performing actions, doing drama, several things which have proven to be helpful for any language learner. So these were like a small set of language teaching methods. The set is not exhaustive. There are many more methods, but like our discussion should be restricted to this number because these are the most important methods. Let me also draw your attention to teaching learning activities for language classroom, because whether you are following this method or that method, some activities have permitted through all methods and they have proven to be highly useful. Like you need to have drills, but at the same time you also can ask your learners to try something called diary writing. Now, diary writing is not a very new thing. It is an activity that many people have done as a hobby. But in a language classroom, diary writing ensures that the use of language, especially the skill to narrate incidents, the skill to use past tense correctly would be ensured, because you do not write your diary in present tense. Mostly diary is written in past tense. And then sometimes when people plan something, the future tense also comes into play. So that way diary writing becomes a very interesting, a very effective tool for language teachers. Role plays are also very important because you actually distract your learners from the troubles that they are facing, and you engage them in interesting activities and make them use language or learn language properly. Then you can also make them learn language by teaching. That means you make the learners teachers. So learners become teachers and they are teaching what they have learned. When they are teaching what they have learned, they are actually perfecting what they have learned. Then other activities like extempore and elocution or storytelling, they're very well proven activities. Storytelling has its own advantages. It does not require any discussion because it's a very well accepted, very popular method of language teaching. Then group discussions, reading together. Reading together again is very important because when we are reading a particular text, we may develop our own understanding, which may not be similar to what other people are understanding. So therefore, reading together helps a lot when a common text is chosen and all the persons, including the teacher, are reading that and then discussing it further to have a common understanding. That sometimes saves the students from overgeneralization and developing meaning on their own. I'm very sure you might have come across some instances, you might have experienced yourself some situations in which you read a particular text in which there was an unfamiliar word and you guessed the meaning of the word, but you were wrong. Or you guessed the meaning of the word, you were right. Or you guessed the meaning of the word which was fit in that occasion, but it cannot be used in some other circumstance or some other occasion. So these are things which can be done away with when reading together happens. Then debates are also very interesting because that provides smaller time duration to the learners, and they have to quickly think. So their cognitive abilities come into force and then work for the development of that particular language which you are interested in. Just a minute activities are also very interesting because this also helps them very conscious about the correctness and appropriateness of language. Then some kind of surveys and use of audio visual method techniques, and then use of computer assisted tools, use of mobile technology, and several other things are also of very high importance. I would like to thank the audience for their patience in listening to the methods, and I would also like to thank the organizers for having provided me an opportunity to discuss some of these ideas with which I have been able to discuss some methods. I'm very sure some of these would resonate with your own understanding of language, and some of them if they have caused you some interest, we may discuss them further. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you, sir.
Tariq Khan, for such a wonderful presentation. And I will just invite few questions because there has been a request from the audience yesterday that they don't get enough time for the lunch. and coincidentally, your lecture and the next lecture, sandwiches the
Thank you,
lunch.
sir.
So I need to just make it quick for everybody. But anyway, there are some two questions which have already come on the chat box. One question is, please clarify between acquisition and learning. This question comes from Dilip Kumar Mohanty, sir. The difference between acquisition and learning. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for the question, because these terms are used interchangeably. Very often, the teachers and trainers think that these are one and the same. But no, the scholars who have proposed these terms make a very clear-cut distinction. When we say acquisition, it refers to natural, involuntary learning. For instance, we did not receive formal training in our own language when we are growing in our own surrounding. So when children grow in their own surrounding without formal training, it is called acquisition. So acquisition does not involve formal training, whereas learning involves explicit instruction and formal training. So all of us, when we are conversing in English, we know that English was not spoken in our homes. We went to school and we learned English through explicit instruction in the classroom. So we became speakers of this language only through formal training. So for us, English was learned, and our own languages. So for me, I'm a speaker of Hindi Urdu, and for me, Hindi Urdu was acquired, English was learned. Again, let me draw a small distinction between acquisition in children and acquisition in adults. Very often, you'll come across some adult members who acquire language. That means they go into a surrounding, they do not attend classes, just by playing in the surrounding, by playing with their, or just by meeting people, just by participating in activities, they observe and they acquire that language. That means acquisition mostly happens in case of first language among children, but it can also happen with adult members, provided there is no formal training. The moment we say formal training, it is learning.
Okay.
I hope this clarifies the issue.
Yes.
You'll come across some business communities who provide you the best examples for acquisition and learning. They go from place to place and they are able to use the language of those places perfectly without formal instruction.
Correct.
Right? So they have some kind of motivation. There is another question that is related to contrastive analysis, for example. Yes, contrastive analysis basically refers to analyzing two languages or two varieties of a language, the structure of those varieties or those languages, and then finding out what our learners would encounter as problems. Let us take examples of, say, English here. If I say English has two sounds like sa and sha, and I have Odia students in my classroom, I'm very sure that they may face difficulty with this distinction of sa and sha, because in Odia, sa and sha are mostly used interchangeably, except for instances when the word has derived from Sanskrit sources. So by comparing the structure of these two languages, we are aware of the fact that sa and sha can be a problem for my learners. Similarly, there can be several other problems. For instance, if I were teaching Hindi to Odia speakers, then I know that gender can create a problem. Like even for, say, Bangla speakers, where I very often come across sentences like मेरा मम्मी और तुम्हारा मम्मी जा रहा था. So a Hindi Urdu speaker would say मेरी मम्मी जा रही थी. They would not say मेरा मम्मी जा रहा था. Now in these circumstances, if we know the two languages well in advance and compare the structures of these two languages, we would know what is missing in the language that the source, I mean, what is missing in the source language, or what is missing in the language that the learner has already. And the focus would be on those aspects more than other aspects. I hope this clarifies the issue.
Sir, that definitely clarifies the issue. And I will be sending more details to conduct contrastive analysis. There is one more hand raised of Mr. Balram. I cannot read his full name. Balram, sir?
Sir.
You want to ask something to that speaker? Please ask.
Sir, my question is, what is 1 minute activity? Kindly clarified. 1 minute activity that is detailed in the
Some examples of the 1 minute activity, sir.
1 minute activities. Is it related to the slide which I have shared, or it is just a 1 minute activity you're asking?
There is one slide.
On the slide, just on
Okay.
just a minute activities you have.
So in the slide I have not said 1 minute. I have said just a minute. So
Just
it's
a
an
minute.
yeah, just a minute. Let me explain it to you. It is a situation in which there would be 10 to 15 students learning a language. The teacher is also sitting there. He or she is also one of the participants. And then there is a topic. On that topic, one of the members will raise the hand and start speaking. The person would be speaking continuously. The other person would notice a grammatical error in the speech, and he would say just a minute, and then start speaking from that point on. As soon as this person makes an error, another person says just a minute, and then starts speaking there. So what happens is, by saying just a minute, the learners get the opportunity to speak, and they have to speak without committing errors. So when they are speaking or pausing, when they are committing errors or pausing, the other members would get the opportunity. So this method makes them very, very alert to errors. This method makes them very, very conscious about grammatical errors, pronunciation errors, and they also know that they need to speak coherently. It cannot be that I speak one sentence now and I speak another grammatical sentence after 10 minutes. The speech, what you want your learners to do is, you want them to speak fluently, you want them to speak coherently. So for both these goals, just a minute activity is very useful. But if you all are also interested in 1 minute activities or 5 minute activities, there are some interesting books. If you do a small search, there is a book which is titled 5 minute activities for language classrooms. I may not have pronounced the name correctly. If required, I can pass on the names, appropriate title of the book and the author later on.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful presentation and the kind of clarification which you have given in the end of the session. And I'm sure that the participants have learned a lot. And if there are any pending questions, remaining questions, I'll be happy to send them to your email. And I'm sure that you'll be happy to respond them to. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being
Thank you
with
for
us.
the opportunity, and thank you for your patience. Have a good day.
And now there is a small announcement for the participants.
When we come back from lunch, sir?
Huh?
Sir, when you will come back from lunch? Tell me the time. कब हम lunch के बाद आएंगे, join करेंगे?